The war that will hit your wallet, how America's strike on Iran could reshape the global economy and your daily life. Let's take a closer look together. It all started when the price of gas dropped to $2.98 a gallon. That number was a quiet symbol, almost a promise. Low fuel prices meant the American economy was breathing a little easier. Grocery prices were stabilizing. Road trips were enjoyable again. People were starting to feel cautiously that things might work out, that everything would be okay. But then something happened that proved them wrong. On the night of February 28, 2026, instead of sun and clouds, bombs filled the sky. In a sweeping operation codenamed Epic Fury, the United States and Israel launched a major war against Iran. The targets were clear: nuclear facilities, missile infrastructure, and top military leadership. Within 24 hours, the supreme leader was dead, Natanz had been leveled, and the world came face to face with a reality it had been warned about for decades. But this isn't just about a war. It's not only lives that were lost. There's a cost measured in dollars, in barrels of oil, and in the price of everything you touch in every corner of the economy every single day. The world's most important waterway. You've never thought about close your eyes and picture this. A narrow strip of ocean, just 34 kilometers wide at its tightest point. Iran on one side, Oman on the other. It doesn't look like much on a map. But through this narrow passage, the Strait of Hormuz, flows roughly 20% of the entire world's daily oil needs. Not one country's oil. We're talking about the needs of the entire world. Add to that 23% of the world's liquefied natural gas and 31% of global petroleum product shipments. This strait is the most critical transit point keeping the global economy alive, and right now that passage is under serious threat. Iran's Revolutionary Guard warned tankers to halt their passage. One tanker has already been struck. Major shipping companies, Maersk, MSC, Hapag-Lloyd, have suspended all transits through the strait. Some vessels have rerouted around Africa, which means weeks of delays and massive cost increases. Marine insurers have pulled their coverage entirely. When the flow of goods is disrupted, prices rise sharply. This isn't politics. These are the facts. And right now the world's most critical sea lane is grinding to a halt. So how will these developments affect us, the people? It will start with oil. There's an uncomfortable truth about oil markets. They don't wait for certainty. They price in fear ahead of time. The moment the first missiles hit their targets, crude oil markets shot upward. Brent crude, the global benchmark, broke through the $100 a barrel barrier. Bloomberg economics analysts warn that if Hormuz flows remain disrupted, we could see $108 per barrel in a moderate scenario, with a worst-case range of $120 to $150. What does this mean for us? The math is brutal. Every 10% increase in crude oil prices adds roughly 25 cents per gallon at the pump. If oil reaches $140, that $2.98 gallon climbs to $4.50 or higher, almost overnight. But the impact doesn't stop at the gas station. Jet fuel rises in lockstep, dragging airline ticket prices with it. Diesel keeps freight trucks running. Freight trucks move food. Heating oil warms homes across the Northeast. Every sector of the American economy that touches physical goods, which is nearly all of it, runs on oil. When oil prices rise, the entire supply chain rises with them. Economists estimate that a 5% increase in oil prices adds 0.1 percentage points to inflation. That sounds small until you run the numbers on a full-blown supply disruption. If prices spike 50%, you're adding a full percentage point on top of whatever inflation is already running. While oil climbed, financial markets did what they always do in moments of geopolitical shock. They looked for shelter. Gold surged 1.4%, crossing $5,400 an ounce to reach historic highs. Gold is the world's oldest safe haven asset. When people lose trust in currencies, governments, or markets, they buy gold. The sharpness of this spike tells you something important. Investors are not reading this as a short surgical operation, but as the beginning of something longer and far more destabilizing. Stock markets swung violently. Defense stocks, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, jumped immediately. These companies make the missiles, the jets, the guidance systems. War is their business model, and markets rewarded them for it. But broader indices were choppy, as investors tried to figure out whether this conflict would stay contained or spiral into a wider regional war. Airlines, retail, logistics companies, anything dependent on cheap and predictable fuel, took serious hits. Bond markets also showed rising yields, a signal that investors expect either higher inflation or more government borrowing, most likely both. The word economists hate to say out loud. There's a word economists hate to say out loud because they fear saying it makes it real. What is it? Stagflation. Stagflation is the combination of stagnant economic growth and rising inflation, the worst of both worlds. The reason it's a nightmare is that none of the normal policy tools work. The Federal Reserve can't cut interest rates to stimulate growth because that makes inflation worse. It can't raise rates to fight inflation because that crushes growth. In short, there is no way out. We've been here before. In 1973, an Arab oil embargo drove crude prices up a terrifying 300% over several months. The American economy was devastated. The lines at gas stations stretched beyond sight. Factories slowed production. Inflation hit double digits. The economy shrank. Recovery took years, and the experience fundamentally changed how Americans thought about energy, foreign oil dependence, and economic vulnerability. Today's circumstances are different, but the risk is familiar. If Hormuz flows remain disrupted for weeks or months, global oil supply takes a severe hit. Prices rise, inflation grows, consumer spending falls, business investment freezes. The Fed is paralyzed, and an American economy that was only just starting to feel stable takes a blow it never saw coming. But there's Trump's impossible promise. Here is the political paradox at the center of all this. The president who ordered the strike on Iran is the very same president who made low gas prices the centerpiece of his campaign. Trump put energy costs at the heart of his economic message. Drill, baby, drill wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise. Low fuel prices were the visible proof that his economic strategy was working. That $2.98 gallon was a political achievement. Now, by launching Operation Epic Fury without a congressional vote and without any serious public debate, he has set in motion forces that could drive those same prices sharply higher. The war may be militarily justifiable, you can argue about that, but its economic consequences will land on all of us regardless of how anyone feels about Iran's nuclear program. Then there is the question of direct cost. Modern military operations are extraordinarily expensive. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, including operational costs, equipment, veteran care, and interest on borrowed funds, cost the United States over $2 trillion combined. An extended conflict with Iran, a country far more capable than either of those adversaries, could make those numbers look small. That spending has to come from somewhere. Either taxes rise, public services get cut, or the government borrows more, adding to the national debt and ultimately to the interest burden every American carries through the economy. The global ripple. How Canada, the UK, and others will be affected. This isn't just America's story. Oil is a global commodity priced in dollars on international markets. When Hormuz is disrupted, everyone feels the pain. Canada, despite being a major oil producer, is deeply integrated into North American energy markets. Fuel prices in Ontario and British Columbia will track the broader spike. Canadian exporters who rely on trucking, shipping, and aviation will face rising costs. The United Kingdom carries a particular vulnerability. It imports significant volumes of liquefied natural gas from Qatar, which exports nearly all of it through the Strait of Hormuz. If the strait closes for an extended period, Europe scrambles for alternative supplies from the US and Norway, pushing prices up across the continent. British households already exhausted by years of energy bill inflation could face yet another wave of increases. Asia faces perhaps the sharpest exposure. China, Japan, South Korea, and India are among the world's largest oil importers, and most of their supply transits Hormuz. If those nations begin panic buying to build strategic reserves, a reasonable response to uncertainty, the scramble for limited supply could trigger what analysts have called the largest bidding war in history. Prices wouldn't just rise, they would be bid up to whatever level finally destroys enough demand to match the constrained supply. What history teaches us about war and money. Every major war in modern history has been inseparable from economics, not just in the obvious sense that wars cost money, but in the deeper sense that wars reshape money itself. World War I ended the gold standard for most of Europe. World War II gave birth to the Bretton Woods system, making the US dollar the world's reserve currency. The Vietnam War, and its enormous cost, pushed Richard Nixon, in a single afternoon in 1971, to sever the dollar's link to gold and fundamentally transform the global financial system. The 1973 oil embargo didn't just spike gas prices, it triggered a complete rethinking of American energy policy, accelerated the environmental movement, drove investment in fuel efficiency, and planted the seeds of what would eventually become the shale energy revolution decades later. Wars don't just destroy, they accelerate. They force adaptation. They expose vulnerabilities that were always there, but that peace allowed everyone to ignore. The question is not whether this conflict will have lasting economic consequences. It will. The question is what those consequences will be, and who will pay for them. History doesn't remember the missiles. History remembers the bills. The Treaty of Versailles burdened Germany with reparations so crushing that they fueled the hyperinflation of the 1920s, the desperation of the 1930s, and ultimately another world war. America's post-9/11 wars were financed on borrowed money, and the interest payments alone have exceeded the original cost of the operations. Those who give the order to go to war don't pay immediately. The cost is distributed, spread across slowly rising gas prices, inflation that erodes our savings, taxes that increase years later, or national debt loaded onto the next generation. The generals and politicians move on. The economy absorbs the shock slowly, invisibly, over years. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz is a pressure point, with the world's finger pressing down on it. Whether Iran escalates, whether diplomacy finds a foothold, whether the strait reopens in days or stays closed for months, all of it will determine whether the economic impact is a sharp spike that fades or a slow-burning wound that lasts for years. What is certain is this: the $2.98 gallon you filled up last week was priced in a different world. The world changed on February 28th, 2026, and whoever ends up paying for this war, it won't be the people who started it. This content is for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this video constitutes financial or investment advice. If you enjoyed what you heard and it gave you a new perspective, don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Take good care of yourselves.